Welcome to the Transform Sales Podcast, where forward-thinking business leaders come to share their experiences and ideas, learn from each other, and amplify their results together.
Hey guys, it's the Transform Sales Podcast. Amir Writer. I got my guest, Amir Rubenstein with Amy.io. Did I pronounce it correctly?
Exactly. I pronounced it just right.
How you doing, man? Where are you today?
I'm in the outskirts of beautiful Tel Aviv, Israel, and it's a nice sunny day here.
You're in the Holy Land. Well,
exactly.
Close to the Holy Land. Well, I appreciate you taking time to be on the show. On this show, we like to talk about mistakes that buyers make when engaging with outsourced sales agencies. As you know, revenue and generating pipeline is one of the most important things for companies, and it's getting harder and harder to make meetings. So the idea of this podcast is for listeners who sometimes are either sales agencies themselves or buyers who have bought agency services before, had a good experience or a bad experience, or people that are new. The idea is for them to just hear the real deal honesty about mistakes that they make during the buying and working process that affect their performance. Not mistakes that affect your ability to convert them as a customer, but things that are like, I wish they said this or did that so that they can get what they want. Because I think we both know that there is not an agency owner in the world that wants to not perform for their clients, right? But before we get into that, for anybody listening, who are you and how did you get into this lovely business of outsourced sales agency work to begin with? What's the journey?
So thank you. So I've been doing B2B sales and tech sales specifically for the past 15 years. And then my last gig was that one-man show at a small startup. And I was working with an outsourced company who were supposed to bring me meetings, but they were not doing a great job. They were bringing like 2 or 3 meetings a month. And I started to try to work with them on that. But when I started to work with them, I had this aha moment that I could do this better. I always loved the prospecting part, the outbound part of sales. I always like to hunt my own meat, as they say. And especially I was always working at small startups with not a lot of marketing budget. So I really practiced it myself and mastered it myself, and I really studied it, the different type of messaging and emails and cold calls. My background is in telemarketing. That's why my first sales job was in telemarketing. So I was working a big calling center. So I was calling all day. So I was never shy of the phone. And I was starting to get frustrated with these outsourcing companies or other SDRs who were a little bit shy of the phone. And that's why I decided to start Amy along with my partner, Yael.
So that's it's a common theme that I hear where it's essentially, I got exposed to the business of sales early on. I got really good at it. I saw that other companies couldn't execute it, and I decided to productize my skill sets and my services. And that's awesome, right? Because basically, you're like, I'm a Marine. I became a sales Marine early on, and then I decided to make a business out of it, which is great because a lot of people who are listening, oftentimes they're looking for these VPs of sales, these CROs, these high-flying positions. And oftentimes those people don't have the 15 years of working at a call center experience. They kind of fail to understand that agency owners are part of your team and you're getting all that experience. And oftentimes, they don't know that, but I know that about you, right? So I know that, you're hands-on with a lot of your customers personally, and that you take part in the actual act of helping your customers generate business, right? I think in the sales agency world, operations is sales, right? So that's an awesome intro. I've heard that a few times. So there's a common denominator between all of us. I'm the same background, by the way. I got really good at sales, I think, right? I never gave up. I got really good at rejection, if that makes sense. The byproduct is you're good at sales, and then wanted to help people too. So I'm familiar with that journey. How long has Amy been around, and how many years have you been helping people with outsourced sales to this date?
So we started just before COVID started. So it was about January, February of 2020 when we actually started to prospect for ourselves. Me and my partner started to do cold calls and build a cadence for us and to start to prospect. I think we landed our first customer at the end of February, just about when COVID hit the world, basically. So we've been around for now, we're about to celebrate 3 years.
Yeah, and you're hundreds of employees. You guys are growing super fast. No. How many? What's your headcount now?
Yeah, so we're at about 120 people today, and we expect it to grow this month to around 20 people more. So yeah, that's where we are.
That's amazing. So over the years, what have you seen? What mistakes have you seen buyers make during the buying process? That's just kind of repeating theme. Like, is there something that just stands out to you where it's like over and over again, buyers are making the same mistake when looking for an agency? What is that problem, if any, and what does that look like?
So I think, and especially recently, I get that objection more. I get that question more during my sales process, and I guess it's because of maybe some bad experience that some customers or buyers have, as that they decide to go with, or they would really try to be around success based, and I think that's a big mistake that buyers are doing. Because when you are trying to go with success based only, or that's what you're focusing on, because you're worried that maybe your agency wouldn't deliver, then it just shows that you don't show trust in the process. And second, you are jeopardizing quality. So okay, so probably agencies would give you quantity, but less focus on quality. And they would also focus perhaps on customers that will be willing to pay based on their model and the way that they want to work.
Yeah, and it's very rare that a buyer would say, we had 10 meetings and we lost all of that. We lost all 10 meetings because our messaging wasn't clear and we need to improve our sales process. Oftentimes they fail to look in the mirror and they're like, they're bad meetings, right? So like it creates this whole thing where they think, okay, I'm going to pay for meetings. And then now instead of saying, okay, I didn't follow up 15 times, I didn't ask them the right questions, they'll say the meetings weren't good, right? So it's like this negative feedback loop that I've seen, quite a few times. So yeah, so basically anybody listening, I think, and it's also perspective, right? At the end of the day, can you hire an agency at this paper meeting and can they do well? Sure they can. Statistically speaking, does it happen that often? Actually, no, right? We've also noticed transparently, Amir, that I'll tell you that like over the time, because we're not collecting all this data about agencies, we do notice that surprisingly, the agencies that have 12-month contracts, some of them have 4-month outs, tend to be the happiest customers. Do I think it's because of the contract? No, but I think it has something to do with the commitment that is given from the buyer, right? And we'll start releasing this data for buyers so that people can see the real deal. And anybody listening to what Amir is saying, like if you want a paper meeting, go to LinkedIn, go to Google, and go to Facebook and run some digital ads. You can paper meeting. I bet you, right? I spent $17K on LinkedIn ads last month and I got nothing.
Exactly.
The difference is that I don't go, LinkedIn is a crook and they suck, I because they're big, right? So I think it's those tendency that like companies tend to, because you're not LinkedIn or Google, if you don't perform, now you have to be 100%, accountable. But when they give their money to the big companies, then they're like, oh, maybe our sales cycle is broken, right? Which is just weird paradox. On top of just the overall urge to think that you're winning by asking for a paper meeting, what mistakes do buyers make when they actually, let's just say they come to you, they're okay with your retainer, which I know is a very, very fair retainer amount. You guys are $2 signs on our pricing menu in our marketplace, which is not the $4 signs. So you guys are not the most expensive. Customer says, great, Amy, that you guys are what we need. Everything makes sense. Talk to me about mistakes that buyers make now that they've selected an agency. Like what is the most common mistake you see? And I know that we were talking before about this, about a mutual customer between us that is making one of those mistakes. Not that you have to talk about them or that one, but what do you see? Like what's the most common thing?
I think one of the most common thing is that you are hiring an expert, you're hiring an agency, and then you dictate them on how to work. That's a common mistake that I see. A lot of our customers trust us completely, and they put their trust in us to do the whole work, to write the playbook, the strategy, the tactics, and to manage the people. But a lot of them also want to be too much hands-on. And you mentioned also those CROs or VP sales that don't have cold calling experience, don't have SDR experience, but they feel that they know how to give advice. I see that so many times also, that they give advices to our SDRs in the beginning or as we go along, and they give them bad advices that, again, just because they don't have the experience. So again, you're hiring an expert, So let them do the work and trust them and trust the process. And even though you're a big shot CRO or VP sales, or maybe you're even a founder that thinks that you know how to do sales, still there's a big difference between doing sales and doing SDR work. And if you haven't picked up the phone in your life, then don't give advice on how to do a cold call.
Yeah, that makes sense. So anybody listening, right, if you're going to hire an agency for their expertise, right, and it's interesting you say what you're saying, because right, I think there's a balance where like there's those buyers that are not involved enough, and then there's the buyers who are too involved, right? So
Exactly.
for me, listening to what you're saying, it makes sense, because if you don't trust the process, right, and you don't let the experts do what they can do, you could very well steer a program into the zone of you're not happy. And as you mentioned, this typically happens during the beginning of a campaign, right? So if you're giving advice to, let's say, an SDR, 2 or 3 SDRs that are hired through Amy, if you give advice to them during onboarding, and there's not that it's wrong, but it's not a high performing advice, now you could have 2-3 months of low performance before you start listening to the advice, and by then you might already be unhappy.
Exactly, and I think from the other side of that is to be a little bit more passive aggressive. You're right on that as well. Also this type of customers that they don't communicate, and they just like want to be okay. I'll put my trust in them, and I won't talk with them, and I'll trust them 100%, and I won't communicate with them, and won't give them feedback. And then 2 months down the line, things are not doing as great as expected. What happened? So communication is super key. There's definitely needs to be a certain balance in between. Communication is super important. We want to get from our customers product knowledge and to learn about common questions and objections that we should typically get. But leave us the work on how to work the process, the cold calling, building the sequence, building the messaging, and but work with us. So it is important to understand it is a joint work, but there should be some sort of balance.
How often do you find buyers that have those things created already? They already have the objection handling, they have a playbook. What percentage of buyers have a sales development playbook?
Very rarely that I have
Let's put a number on it. 5% of the time?
5%, 10% maybe, and some of them also, when they want to bring their messaging in, I always say that, you know what, if you have a killer email or a killer message that works on LinkedIn, or a call script, again, none of them usually do cold calls where we focus a lot on that, but if you have a killer message that brings you 5 meetings a day, then bring it to me and we'll use that. Otherwise, just let me do the work. And when I say that, nobody shares with me their messaging, because nobody has a killer message.
Yeah, well, it's a paradox, right? Because at one time that you might say that a company that has all these things and completed might not be looking for a sales agency, right? So it's like tendency, if you're going to hire a sales agency, it's most likely because you need a little bit help with the messaging, the sequencing, you need that expertise, which makes total sense. So it's like it's one of those things where if you're buying for those reasons, if you're like, hey, when I work with Amy.io, I also get Amir's, 10 plus years of call center experience included. And then you kind of cut that experience out, right? You're not actually really getting what you're paying for, right? You're not paying for activities. Could be if they're all lined up correctly, but you're paying for the expertise and the feedback to tweak those activities to get results, right? So that makes sense. And I think it's a good point you bring up, where I think there's no right answer, but I think there should be some more education on that go-to-market plan and onboarding and what's needed, right? Do you find that customers that like give you access to Slack and communicate in real time typically get better results than, say, customers that only work and communicate via email? Like, do you notice any uptick or downtick based on a buyer's willingness to communicate in real time? Because I've definitely noticed that I can help people faster on WhatsApp in real time. What do you see in that area?
100%. We always open a joint Slack channel. We want to join their channels, or to open WhatsApp, or whatever convenient to the customer, to do a fast communication. Because if the SDR team right now, they have an urgent question, they have someone on the line, or someone asks a question on LinkedIn, or they have an email or anything, they want a fast communication. Also, if there's a meeting coming up and, if there's, a probability it's going to be a no-show, or we need a rapid response from the account executive, maybe we really need to have that fast communication. So we don't even work with companies that don't, open up the communication and just leave it by email. We don't do that.
Yeah, it's too slow for a real-time sport.
Exactly.
Right. This is not golf. It's more like basketball than anything.
Exactly.
Talk to me about, and I know that I've worked with you guys already. I think we're, as a marketplace, we've been around our Pivot's been around for a year, and we've been very fortunate to have, I think, one mutual customer, and I know what they are, but I don't want to steer this answer. If you had to pick between software and services, and I know that you can help both because everybody can help both, which one would you pick and why?
Software.
Okay. Why?
Yeah.
And you could say just I like it better. It doesn't. It doesn't have to be.
The most honest answer, well, it's to one. That's where most of my experience is, because I work for SaaS companies. Being in Israel, we have a huge ecosystem for B2B SaaS companies. So that's where most of my experience is. Second, they typically get investments from VCs, or they roll on investors' money, so they're a little bit less stressed out about their marketing spend. So they're a little bit less stressed out, and giving that length or that patience for the campaign to work, rather than service company where typically they're bootstrapped, they're like us, they build the business with their blood, sweat, and tears and their own money. So they're a little bit more conscious on their budget, and they have that small business mindset compared to startups.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. For anybody listening, remember, Amy handles both service and software. I'm asking direct questions here, and it makes sense that with your background, right? You gear towards software. I say the same thing too. So that's my opinion as well. And then obviously the DNA of a business is different, right? Where companies that are software typically raise seed rounds, Series A rounds, and actually have their investment planned with 18, 20-month paybacks. I think service companies, you tend to get I have a 7-month sales cycle with $100,000 ACV, but if I don't get an ROI in 5 months, you're fired, and you're kind of just, how do you work with that, right? We've all seen that before. What about region? Is there any region in particular that you guys crush it? United States, EMEA, and I know that you guys obviously cover global, but what would be, if you had to pick one region to run a campaign, which would it be and why?
So we have our biggest success. That's because most of the companies we work with want to target North America and the US in specific.
Yeah.
And then the EMEA market, and then globally. But yeah, like you mentioned, we do target globally. So we had success in all the regions, but that's where most of our people
Yeah,
are.
so your headquarters is in Israel, and I think you have offices in maybe like Eastern Europe, right? So I think EMEA is very easy for you to cover, but that answer makes sense. United States is one of the bigger markets, right? So I think it's common for people to say United States is a premier market, which makes a lot of sense. So if you're any preference with, and I think you kind of answered that already, the software, but like bootstrap, startup, Series A, publicly traded, what's your sweet spot? Do you have that sweet spot? Like, hey, 5 million. If you're trying to go from 5 to 15 million, that's your what's the cream of the crop for you guys?
The perfect sweet spots for us is the early stage startup. I think that's where we bring the most value, because more established startups or more established companies, they might already have the infrastructure, the resources. Then okay, that's great. We join, we tag along with their internal team.
Yeah,
and we join forces there. Now that's great. We bring that value there. That it's a easier, quick ramp up time for their team. So that's good, and that's another value. But I think that our sweet spot and where we bring the most value is early stage startups, where we are the SDR function, and they give us that liberty to build the SDR function. And I really like also when they learn from us, and then they build their own in-house team based on what they methodology they learn from us. And I like to. It's kind of like having my own students or companies that have grown now to have their own in-house team. And sometimes that's a reason they leave us, but that's fine. I respect that, and I like that. Again, it feels like I help
job
them.
well done.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense. Mike, that's your passion, right? Your expertise is the creation, right? And
Exactly.
So like anybody listening, go to Amy for obviously any campaign that you want, but United States software company, you're looking for the creativity, you're looking for a company that will actually act like part of your company, you know. And I, like I said before, I know that we have a mutual customer that has been working with you guys for close to a year now, which I know is way above average, which is awesome. Like that's how we measure things, right? If people are continuously working, that means they're happy. So, you know, so far it's been a pleasure working with you guys. I love the expertise that you bring. You're super passionate about the industry. So it's cool hearing, you know, all the brilliant people in this community that we're building that are just helping companies grow, almost the behind the scenes guys, right? In the sense that a lot of companies have these big internal teams, but people fail to remember the days where Amy.io was rolling up its sleeve to get dirty to build up that infrastructure for a company, then go to from 5 to 20 million with its own internal team. But either way, this has been awesome. You froze on my side. I don't know if you still hear me, but it's good timing because it's the end of the podcast. Well, guys, I think I lost Amir Rubin's team with Amy.io, but the good news is we got all the answers. And if you want to find him, you can easily find him on LinkedIn with Amir Rubin's team, which is his name. You'll find the link when we broadcast this podcast below and in the comments section. And by going to Amy.io's website, guys, appreciate you joining the Transform Sales podcast, and I hope you guys learned some common mistakes that buyers make when selecting and working with agencies so that you guys don't make these mistakes, because mistakes are costly, and that's exactly what we want to solve for. Amir, I just did the goodbye for you. I told everybody where to find you on LinkedIn and on the website. It's okay. Don't worry. It's all good. So everybody, thank you for checking in the Transform Sales podcast. Amir, you're the man. I appreciate you. And we'll continue to help people buy outsourced sales services the right way. On the journey, it means prince. We're outsourced sales princes in our imaginary world that we built for ourselves. All right. See you, man.